Hello there, and welcome to Sleepy Nights. This is Kevin, and tonight we'll journey to a windswept coastal peninsula where a solitary lighthouse stands sentinel against time itself. But first, find yourself drifting into comfort now. Let your body settle naturally. Feel how the surface beneath you offers perfect support. And just slowly begin to notice your breathing, not changing it, just becoming aware of its natural rhythm. Like waves approaching the shore, each breath comes and goes in its own perfect time. This constant rhythm has been with you your entire life. Now imagine that with each exhale, any tension or tightness simply starts dissolving. Starting with your forehead. Notice how the muscles around your eyes and across your brow can soften and release. Your jaw may gently unclench. This peaceful feeling flows down through your neck, across your shoulders, which may drop a tiny bit lower as they let go of the day's responsibilities. The relaxation continues flowing downward through your arms to your fingertips, your chest, your abdomen, along your spine, your hips, legs, all the way to your feet. Now, let yourself be carried along on the gentle current of my voice as we discover the secret of a lighthouse keeper who appears only in the sweep of light. The key rattled in the ancient lock as Eliza Thorne pushed open the heavy oak door of Tempest Lighthouse. Autumn sunlight spilled across the threshold, illuminating dancing dust in the air. It smelled of lemon oil, old books, and something else. Something she couldn't quite name but remembered from childhood visits. Time, perhaps. The accumulated weight of years within these circular stone walls. She stood motionless in the doorway, allowing her eyes to adjust to the dimness inside. The main floor was exactly as she remembered. The worn wooden floorboards that creaked in specific places. The built-in shelves lined with logbooks and nautical references. The sturdy desk, positioned to catch the best light from the east-facing windows. Her grandmother's reading glasses, still lay folded beside a half-empty jar of pencils, as though Margaret Thorne had merely stepped out for a moment rather than passed away 3 weeks ago. "Well, I'm here," Eliza said softly to the empty room. "Just like you wanted." No response came except the distant cry of gulls and the steady rhythm of waves against the cliffs below. She hadn't expected one, yet something about the lighthouse, its presence, the way the light filled the circular space, it always made it feel like more than a building. Watchful, aware. Eliza set her suitcase down and moved to the desk, running her fingers across its polished surface. The lawyer's words echoed in her mind. "Your grandmother's will stipulates that you must serve as lighthouse keeper for a minimum of 1 year before you can take full possession or sell the property." A ridiculous requirement in an age of automated navigation systems, but legally binding nonetheless. One year of her life, traded for financial security and freedom from the mounting debts that had followed her since graduate school. It had seemed a reasonable bargain when her position at the Boston architecture firm had been eliminated and her apartment lease had conveniently ended in the same month. The timing had been so perfect it almost felt orchestrated, though Eliza dismissed the thought. Her grandmother couldn't have predicted her job loss from 300 miles away. A movement by the window caught her eye. Just a curtain stirring in the breeze. But it drew her attention to the glass-fronted cabinet beyond. Inside, dozens of leather-bound journals stood in neat rows, their spines labeled with names and dates spanning more than a century. She recognized her grandmother's volumes at the end of the sequence. The most recent marked Margaret Thorne. Curiosity pulled her toward them. The cabinet wasn't locked, and the hinges moved silently, well-oiled. Eliza selected the final volume and opened it, expecting to find her grandmother's familiar handwriting. Precise script that had filled birthday cards and the occasional letters. Instead, she found something incomprehensible. The text, while appearing to be English, seemed to flow and shift in patterns that made no sense. The letters twisted and changed as she looked at them, almost as if they were deliberately evading her understanding. She blinked hard, wondering if the long drive had affected her vision. What in the world? She murmured, grabbing an earlier volume. The same indecipherable script filled the pages. She tried another and another, all filled with a strange cipher that looked almost like language, but refused to be read. Only when she found the official Lighthouse logs, stored in a separate shelf, did Eliza discover text she could understand. Practical records of maintenance, weather observations, and occasional notes about passing ships. These entries betrayed nothing of the mystery contained in the personal journals. Near the desk, a small cabinet caught her eye. Unlike the utilitarian furniture throughout the lighthouse, this piece was ornate, carved from dark wood with intricate patterns of waves and stars around its edges. Inside lay a collection of crystal prisms, each uniquely cut and carefully nestled in compartments lined with faded blue velvet. She lifted one, watching as it caught the light and scattered into rainbows across the wall. Just more of Grandma's eccentricities, she told herself, setting the crystal back in its place. But a sense of unease had settled over her, a feeling that she was missing something important, something that had been right in front of her all along. The sound of her phone ringing broke the spell. It was the real estate agent she'd contacted before leaving Boston, eager to discuss options for the property once the obligatory year is completed. Eliza answered briefly, confirming the meeting for the following week, then ended the call. The conversation left her feeling oddly disloyal, though she couldn't say why. She'd never promised to keep the lighthouse, and the grandmother had certainly given her the option to sell in the will's careful wording. As evening approached, Eliza unpacked her belongings in the keeper's quarters. Snug bedroom and sitting area in the lighthouse's lower level. The space was surprisingly comfortable, with modern additions like updated plumbing and a small but efficient kitchen. Margaret Thorne might have been traditional, but she hadn't been averse to practical improvements. When darkness fell, Eliza climbed the spiral staircase to the lantern room at the top of the tower. The massive Fresnel lens at its center gleamed in the last rays of sunset, waiting for night to transform it into the guardian of Tempest Point. She familiarized herself with the controls using the lamplighter's manual she'd found on the desk. Surprisingly straightforward, despite the lighthouse's age. The automated system hummed to life at her touch, and the beam began its steady rotation, sweeping across the dark waters of the bay every 7.5 seconds. Eliza stood mesmerized by the rhythm, feeling a strange connection to generations of keepers who had stood in the same spot, watching the same light turn through countless nights. For that moment, the weight of obligation lifted, replaced by something unexpected. Quiet sense of continuity, of being part of something older and more enduring than herself. Her first few days passed in a blur of practical tasks, learning the lighthouse's maintenance routines, familiarizing herself with the coastal community, and setting up a remote workspace so she could continue freelance design projects. The locals were polite, but reserved, many remembering her from childhood summers, but clearly waiting to see if she would be a temporary visitor or something more permanent. It was on her third evening that she first saw him. Eliza had taken to watching the beam sweep across the bay after sunset, tracking its path from the lighthouse to the distant headland. There was something hypnotic about the steady rotation, the way the light briefly illuminated fragments of coastline before moving on. But that night, as the light passed over a small cove about half a mile down the shore, she glimpsed a figure standing at the water's edge. A man in dark clothing, bent over what what appeared to be instruments of some kind. The beam moved on, plunging the cove back into darkness. When it returned 7.5 seconds later, the man was still there, unmoved, his attention focused on his task. Each sweep of light revealed him for just a moment. There, then gone, then there again, like a stuttering film. Eliza grabbed her grandmother's binoculars from their hook by the window, focusing on the cove to catch the figure in the next sweep of light. For 3 rotations, she saw nothing but empty beach. Then, at precisely 9:17, he appeared. Binoculars revealed more detail. A man in outdated clothing, perhaps mid-30s, with a serious expression and a neat beard. He was examining what looked like a pocket watch, then making notes in a small book. The next morning, intrigued and slightly unsettled, Eliza hiked down the cliff path to the cove. Sunlight revealed a peaceful crescent of rocky beach, empty save for seagulls and driftwood. No footprints marked the spot where the man had stood. No equipment lay abandoned on the shore. The only unusual feature was a natural rock formation that created a small, protected pool, perfect for studying tidal patterns, she realized. That evening, she watched again. At precisely 9:17, the figure appeared in the beam's sweep, just as before. With the binoculars ready, she caught more details. The man wore clothing from another century. A heavy coat with wide lapels, high boots, a flat cap pulled low over his brow. He knelt at the water's edge, making notes in a small book, occasionally consulting what looked like pocket instruments. His face, when he glanced up, was young but serious. Closely trimmed beard, for a week, she observed this phantom regularly, appearing in the lighthouse beam, always at the same time, always engaged in methodical observations. Historical research at the town library revealed his identity. Thomas Thorne, keeper of Tempest Lighthouse from 1891 to 1895. A photograph in a dusty town almanac confirmed it. The same serious eyes, the same neat beard. Local records credited him with preventing numerous shipwrecks through uncommonly accurate predictions, and noted his mysterious disappearance after 4 years of service. Thomas Thorne. The surname was not lost on Eliza. Further digging revealed he was her great-great-granduncle. Her grandmother's line having inherited the keeper's position after his disappearance. What she was seeing defied explanation. Yet night after night, the beam revealed him working at the cove. A man dead for over a century, visible only in the momentary sweep of light. Her curiosity finally overwhelmed her caution. After studying the lighthouse mechanism for days, Eliza designed a temporary brake that could halt the rotation without damaging the antique machinery. The lighthouse manual explicitly warned against interrupting the rotation in bold underlined text. But on a clear night, when the mysterious figure appeared right on schedule, she engaged her modification, bringing the beam to a halt with its light fixed steadily on the cove. For several long moments, nothing changed. Then, like a photograph developing, the figure of Thomas Thorne became more solid, more present than in their brief flashes. He straightened, seeming to notice the fixed beam, and turned to look directly up at the lighthouse. Heart pounding, Eliza grabbed her coat and flashlight and hurried down the cliff path to the cove. The beam remained fixed above her, illuminating her way, almost as if guiding her to this impossible meeting. When she reached the cove, Thomas Thorne stood waiting. The steady lighthouse beam creating a pool of light around him. His eyes widened at the sight of her modern clothing. But his expression held more confirmation than surprise. "You've figured it out, then," he said. "I wondered when another Thorne would discover the light's true purpose." Eliza stopped, several paces from him, her mind struggling to accept what her eyes were seeing. "You're Thomas Thorne, from 1895. He nodded, glancing up at the fixed beam. "Aye. And you're a Thorne as well, though I don't know your name. But the resemblance to Margaret is striking." "Margaret was my grandmother," Eliza said. "I'm Eliza." "Eliza," he repeated, seeming to test the name. "What year is it for you?" 2025. Thomas absorbed this with remarkable composure. "Yes, that fits the pattern." He gestured to the space between them. "We're not actually in the same time, you understand? I remain in 1895 and you in your 2025. The lighthouse beam creates a bridge between these points. One that only Thorns seem able to cross. If only with their perceptions. Before Eliza could respond, a mechanical click echoed from the lighthouse. The brake she'd installed had disengaged automatically as designed, and the beam resumed its rotation. Thomas faded like morning mist as the light swept past, appearing again only in brief flashes with each rotation. "Tomorrow," his voice came faintly as the beam passed again. "Come tomorrow." Eliza returned to the lighthouse with her mind racing, filled with questions that defied rational explanation. That night, sleep eluded her, and instead she attempted again to decipher her grandmother's journals, wondering if they contained information about Thomas. the lighthouse's strange properties. The text remained stubbornly elusive, the letters shifting and rearranging themselves before her eyes. The next night, she improved her modification to the mechanism, installing a more robust brake with a timer that would allow for longer periods of fixed illumination. When Thomas appeared at his usual time, she engaged it, fixing the beam steadily on the cove. This time, when she reached him, she came prepared with questions. How is this possible? What's happening with the lighthouse? Thomas gestured for her to sit on a rocky outcropping at the cove's edge. Tempest Lighthouse was built with a special purpose. Constructed at a place where time flows strangely, where patterns of events echo across decades. A special lens was crafted by a glassmaker. Some said was more than human. It was designed specifically to illuminate these temporal echoes. That's impossible, Eliza said, though the evidence stood before her. And yet, here we are, Thomas replied with a slight smile. Thorns were chosen as keepers because of a particular sensitivity to these phenomena. Some call it second sight, others a quirk of perception. Whatever its nature, it allows us to see patterns others miss. Over the following weeks, as autumn deepened around Tempest Point, their meetings continued. Thomas taught her how to begin deciphering the mysterious journals. The cipher isn't meant to be read with ordinary light, he explained, teaching her how to position one of the crystal prisms to refract the lighthouse beam onto the pages. Under this specialized illumination, the dancing letters stabilized, revealing text that shifted between multiple layers of meaning. Every keeper adds to our understanding, Thomas said. I appear to each new thorn who discovers the lighthouse's secret, passing on what I've learned and helping them interpret the patterns. As Eliza's skill with the cipher grew, she uncovered the true history of Tempest Point. Not just a dangerous coastline, but a place where disasters seem to repeat in cycles. Shipwrecks, storms, landslides, all followed patterns visible only when viewed across decades or centuries. The lighthouse had been positioned not just to warn ships, but to help its keepers recognize these cycles and intervene before tragedy struck. My predecessor saw the beginnings of understanding, Thomas told her during one of their meetings. But it was during my time that we fully grasped the lighthouse's potential. With the right application of the beam and crystals, we could see how events echoed through time, how disasters leave imprints that recur if not interrupted. Eliza pored through journal after journal, piecing together the history of Thorne keepers who had used their unique position to protect Tempest Point from cyclical tragedies. Her grandmother's entries were particularly detailed, describing subtle interventions that had prevented everything from shipwrecks to landslides. One night, as Thomas guided her through a particularly complex section of her grandmother's journal, Eliza noticed something disturbing. These observations from 15 years ago, they describe conditions similar to what preceded the Great Tempest of 1895. Thomas's expression darkened. The pattern repeats approximately every 100 to 200 years. I tried to prevent the disaster in my time, but I was still learning, still understanding the signs. I managed to save many ships that would have been lost to the storm itself. He shook his head. If what you are seeing is accurate, the cycle may be beginning again. Together they began tracking the signs. Thomas showed her subtle indicators, invisible to modern monitoring systems. Patterns in tidal flows, unusual wildlife behavior, specific formations of clouds that appeared only before major events. As she worked, Eliza realized where her grandmother had arranged for her return. Margaret had recognized the approaching cycle and ensured a Thorne would be at the lighthouse when the pattern culminated. Your grandmother was perhaps one of the most gifted Thorne keepers, Thomas said. She could see connections that took others years to notice. If she arranged for you to be here now, she saw something significant approaching. While using the lighthouse beam to study tidal patterns from different eras in time, Eliza made a startling discovery. Adjusting the crystals as Thomas had taught her, she glimpsed her grandmother as a young woman, standing at the same cove with an elderly Thomas. They were deep in conversation, Margaret taking notes as Thomas pointed to water patterns, just as he did now with Eliza. "You've seen it then," Thomas said when she described the vision. "Each Thornkeeper connects with me at different points in my life. For me, meeting your grandmother hasn't happened yet. For her, it was decades ago. For you, it's history. Time moves strangely around the lighthouse. The light is the key." "Is that why the journals record you as disappearing?" Eliza asked. "Because you were somehow caught between times." Thomas looked out over the water, his expression unreadable. "The records say I disappeared because that's what appeared to happen. The truth is more complex and not yet relevant to your task." He turned back to her. "What matters now is that you understand the approaching danger. As weeks passed, the signs Thomas warned about intensified. Modern meteorologists noticed nothing unusual. But Eliza and Thomas, comparing observations across years and years, recognized the approaching danger. Convergence of conditions would create a storm of unprecedented power, combined with an unusually high spring tide that would overwhelm Tempest Point's harbor and lower town. "The patterns are accelerating faster in my time," Thomas noted with concern. "Human development has altered the coastline, changed how the currents flow. The natural buffers that existed in 1895 are now gone. Eliza faced a dilemma. How could she warn people without revealing the lighthouse's impossible secret? Using knowledge gleaned from the journals, she carefully constructed warnings based on historical patterns and scientific principles modern authorities would understand. She approached the town council first, presenting what appeared to be careful research into historical weather patterns. She spoke with the harbor master, showing tide calculations that projected unusual flooding. She contacted local emergency services, suggesting preparations based on historical precedent. Most dismissed her concerns. A few, including an oceanographer who had studied historical storm patterns, listened. As the first unusual tides appeared, exactly as Eliza had predicted, more began to pay attention. "It's always been this way," Thomas told her. She expressed frustration. "Few listen until the first signs appear. Even in my time, when people were more connected to natural patterns, they resisted uncomfortable truths. That night, before the storm was due to hit, Eliza stood with Thomas in the cove, watching as the first massive swells rolled in. "In my time, 43 people died," Thomas said quietly. "Ships that should have stayed in harbor ventured out. Buildings that should have been evacuated remained occupied. I didn't understand enough then to make them listen. And now?" Eliza asked. "Now we have a century of additional observations. Now we have you." The storm struck with the dawn. Thanks to Eliza's increasingly specific warnings, fishing boats remained in harbor. Low-lying areas had been evacuated, and emergency services were positioned where they would be most needed. The destruction was still significant. Piers shattered, coastal roads washed away, buildings damaged. Not a single life was lost. As the storm subsided, Eliza stood in the lantern room, watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the bay where rescue and recovery operations were already underway. She understood now why her grandmother had been so insistent, why the lighthouse remained so important in an age of GPS and satellite monitoring. Some patterns could only be seen by those with the right perspective that spanned generations. "What happens now?" she asked Thomas next time they met. "The storm has passed. Is that the end of the cycle?" "One cycle ends, others continued," he replied. "The lighthouse doesn't guard against a single threat, but many. Some repeat over decades, others centuries. Your grandmother understood this better than most. She intervened in at least 7 major cycles during her time. Eliza thought of the years ahead, the quiet alertness required, of the responsibility of watching for patterns that others couldn't see. It was a strange duty, invisible to the world yet vital to it. A month later, as her required year of service approached its end, Eliza sat at the old desk with the family journal spread before her. The decision she'd been avoiding could no longer be postponed. Turned to her old life, selling the Lighthouse to developers already making their offers, or accept the responsibility that came with her heritage. On her desk lay 2 documents: contract from a real estate company specializing in unique coastal properties, and a half-finished journal entry written in the cipher Thomas had taught her. That evening she went to the cove one last time. Thomas was waiting, somehow knowing this meeting was different. "You've decided," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have." Eliza looked out over the water and back to the lighthouse standing tall against the darkening sky. "I'm staying. This place, what we do here, it matters." Thomas nodded, satisfaction in his eyes. The lighthouse chooses its keepers as much as they choose it. As the timer on the mechanism broke, the beam swept past. Eliza caught a glimpse of something she hadn't seen before. Not just Thomas, but the faint outlines of other figures. Her grandmother as both young woman and elderly keeper. Other Thornes from photographs that Eliza recognized, all gathered at this same spot, separated by decades, but united by common purpose. When the light returned again and the mechanism switched back on, Thomas stood alone again. "We are never truly alone at Tempest Point," he said. "Every keeper leaves their mark, not just in the journals, but in the light itself." "Will you tell me someday," Eliza asked, "about your disappearance?" Thomas smiled. "The time is right, maybe. Some knowledge, like some storms, has its season." He looked up at the lighthouse. "Now, your task is to learn the patterns, to write your observations in ways future Thornes will understand. You're only beginning to know what this light is capable of. It's not just the past. Sometimes you can see the future. That night, Eliza returned to the lighthouse, called the real estate agent to decline their offer. Then she sat at her grandmother's desk, now her desk, began a new journal, writing in the cipher Thomas had taught her. At the top of the first page she wrote, "The lighthouse at Tempest Point stands not just as a warning to ships, but as a bridge between times. Through its light, we see patterns others cannot. Through to the past, sometimes future. I, Eliza Thorne, add my observations to those who came before and those who will follow, connected by blood and purpose across the years." Outside, the beam turned steadily, illuminating the dark waters as it had for generations, reaching across time, connecting past and future in its eternal sweep.